first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall, up a hitchhiker, and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance over him.
It was a quiet neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a place where the hum of daily life seemed unremarkable. Families went about their routines, neighbors exchanged polite greetings, and the world outside appeared ordinary. But sometimes, what lies beneath the surface of the ordinary defies comprehension. In July of 1991, a single act shattered the illusion of normalcy. A man stumbled into the streets, barefoot, terrified, and pleading for help. His story, at first, seemed almost too bizarre to believe. Yet what followed would unearth a series of events so disturbing that they remain etched in our collective memory decades later. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. A man whose crimes would leave an indelible scar on his community and provoke profound questions about the systems that failed to stop him. Today, we revisit the chilling events that defined one of the most infamous cases in American history. This is not a tale told for shock value. This is an exploration of the lives affected, the patterns missed, and the truths we must confront to better understand the unimaginable. This is the Jeffrey Dahmer story. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the first child of Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. From the outside, the family seemed unremarkable, but inside their modest home, the cracks in the foundation were already forming. Lionel, a chemist, was often absent, consumed by work and academic pursuits. Joyce, his wife, struggled with her mental health and prescription drug dependency, leading to erratic behavior. Their marriage, strained from the start, was marked by frequent arguments, leaving young Jeffrey caught in the crossfire. From an early age, Jeffrey was quiet, withdrawn, and noticeably different. As other children played together, he often stayed on the periphery, an observer rather than a participant. Teachers described him as polite but painfully shy. Yet, beneath this quiet demeanor was an unsettling curiosity that began to emerge. At the age of 6, Jeffrey underwent surgery for a double hernia. His parents later recalled a noticeable change in his demeanor afterward. Whether the surgery was a turning point or coincidence remains unclear, but Jeffrey became increasingly introverted, often retreating into his own world. As his parents' marriage deteriorated, Jeffrey sought solace in solitude. He began collecting roadkill, bringing the remains home, and dissecting the carcasses in the woods behind his house. He claimed it was scientific curiosity, but those who later studied his case saw it as a chilling precursor to the horrors that would come. In high school, Jeffrey's peculiar behavior escalated. He was often drunk, even during class, earning a reputation as the school outcast. While his peers brushed it off as a strange sense of humor, these were early warning signs, red flags that went unaddressed. By the time he graduated in 1978, his parents' divorce was final, and Jeffrey was left alone in the family home. With no supervision, no structure, and no one to notice his increasingly dark thoughts, the stage was set for his first act of violence. By 1987, Jeffrey Dahmer was living in Milwaukee, working at a chocolate factory, and spending his nights frequenting gay bars and bathhouses. On the surface, he seemed to lead an unremarkable life. But beneath the facade, his compulsions had grown uncontrollable. His second victim was Stephen Twomey, a 25-year-old he met at a bar. Dahmer claimed he had no intention of killing Twomey, but after drinking heavily, he woke up to find Twomey dead in his hotel room. Unable to recall the act itself, Dahmer panicked. He purchased a large suitcase, transported the body back to his grandmother's basement, and dismembered it. This was the beginning of what would become a string of murders over the next 4 years. Dahmer developed a chilling routine. He would meet young men, often at bars, lure them back to his apartment under the guise of photography, and drug them. Once unconscious, he would kill them, often by strangulation. Inside apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments, the horrors escalated. Dahmer not only killed his victims but also kept parts of their bodies as trophies, skulls, bones, and even organs stored in his refrigerator. His goal, as he later confessed, was to create a sense of permanence with his victims, whom he viewed as objects of possession rather than people. Enjoying this documentary? Subscribe to our channel to stay informed about more true crime stories and discussions on justice, mental health, and societal reform. Among his victims were young men and boys like Konorak Synthesumphone, just 14 years old. In May 1991, Dahmer lured Konorak to his apartment, drugged him, and subjected him to unimaginable cruelty. But this case stands out because of what happened next. Konorak managed to escape, stumbling into the street, naked and disoriented. Neighbors called the police, but when officers arrived, Dahmer convinced them that Konorak was his 19-year-old boyfriend, intoxicated after a lover's quarrel. The police escorted the boy back to Dahmer's apartment, unknowingly sealing his fate. Hours later, Konorak was dead. This tragic failure highlighted systemic issues, biases, negligence, and a lack of accountability. Had the officers acted differently, Dahmer's reign of terror might have ended that night. In total, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys, ranging in age from 14 to 31. Many were people of color, chosen for their perceived vulnerability. The crimes were marked not only by the violence of the acts themselves but by the rituals that followed: cannibalism, attempts at mummification, and experiments to create zombies by injecting acid into his victims' brains. Dahmer's methods were calculated, yet his recklessness eventually led to his downfall. In July 1991, a potential victim, Tracy Edwards, escaped and flagged down police. What officers found in apartment 213 would haunt them forever: photographs of dismembered bodies, human remains in the refrigerator, and a 57-gallon drum filled with acid. The Milwaukee murders shocked the world. But for the victims' families, the pain was immeasurable. These were not faceless statistics, they were sons, brothers, and friends, people with hopes and dreams that were cruelly stolen. As the scope of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes came to light, so too did the failures that allowed him to continue undetected for so long. Time and again, there were opportunities to intervene, moments where lives could have been saved. One of the most glaring failures occurred on May 27, 1991. Konorak Synthesumphone, just 14 years old, was seen wandering the streets, dazed, bleeding, and naked. Two concerned women called the police, pleading for help. When officers arrived, Dahmer calmly explained that the boy was his boyfriend who had simply had too much to drink. Despite the women's protests and visible signs of injury on Konorak, the officers chose to believe Dahmer. They escorted the boy back to apartment 213, where he was killed hours later. Later, it was revealed that the responding officers, John Balcerzak and Joseph Gabrish, failed to conduct even the most basic checks. They didn't verify Dahmer's identity or Konorak's age. A simple background check would have revealed that Dahmer was a convicted sex offender on probation for assaulting Konorak's older brother 2 years earlier. This wasn't the only time Dahmer slipped through the cracks. Over the years, neighbors reported strange smells coming from his apartment and even saw young men entering but never leaving. Complaints to the building manager and police were dismissed as minor nuisances, often attributed to cultural differences or assumptions about Dahmer's private life. I told the landlord about the smell. It was awful, like rotting meat. But they didn't do anything. They said, "It's probably spoiled food." The failure wasn't just with individuals, it was systemic. Racial and socioeconomic biases played a significant role. Many of Dahmer's victims were young men of color or from marginalized communities, making them less likely to be taken seriously by authorities. In the aftermath of Dahmer's arrest, the Milwaukee Police Department faced public outrage. The 2 officers involved in the Konorak incident were fired but later reinstated after appealing their terminations. The case forced the city to confront its failings and prompted nationwide discussions about accountability and prejudice in law enforcement. But for the victims' families, no amount of scrutiny or reform could undo the damage. These were lives that could have been saved. For them, the missed opportunities were not just mistakes, they were tragedies. On the night of July 22, 1991, a 32-year-old man named Tracy Edwards entered Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. Lured with the promise of money for photographs, Edwards quickly sensed something was wrong. The apartment was suffocatingly hot, reeking of decay, with a foul odor emanating from the kitchen. As Dahmer attempted to handcuff Edwards, he panicked. He managed to escape and ran into the streets, flagging down 2 police officers. What he told them was almost too horrific to believe. When officers entered Dahmer's apartment, they found photographs of dismembered bodies scattered on a dresser. In the refrigerator, they discovered a human head. In a 57-gallon drum, they found decomposing remains submerged in acid. It was the beginning of one of the most chilling crime scene investigations in modern history. Dahmer was arrested on the spot and later confessed to the murders of 17 young men and boys. Over the course of 60 hours of interviews, he recounted the details of each killing with unsettling calm, describing his methods and motivations in clinical detail. The trial began on January 30, 1992, capturing the attention of the nation. Dahmer's defense team entered a plea of insanity, arguing that his gruesome crimes were the result of severe mental illness. The prosecution, however, presented a compelling case that Dahmer was fully aware of his actions and their consequences. They emphasized his calculated methods, his efforts to cover his tracks, his meticulous disposal of evidence, and his ability to manipulate his victims. Prosecutor said, "This was not the work of a man who didn't understand right from wrong. This was the work of someone who chose to kill." Perhaps the most emotional moments of the trial came from the families of the victims. One by one, they took the stand to deliver victim impact statements, their voices trembling with grief and anger. "You took my brother away, and I can't ever forgive you for that. I hope you rot in hell." On February 17, 1992, Dahmer was found guilty on 15 counts of murder. The jury rejected his insanity plea, and he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, 941 years in prison. For the families, the verdict provided some closure, but the wounds left by Dahmer's actions would never fully heal. The trial also raised important questions about the balance between justice and understanding. What drives a person to commit such heinous acts? Could anything have been done to stop him? The story of Jeffrey Dahmer is one that continues to haunt the collective conscience. Beyond the grisly details of his crimes, Dahmer's legacy forces us to confront larger societal issues, the failures in law enforcement, the vulnerabilities of marginalized communities, and the darker aspects of the human psyche that sometimes go unnoticed. His crimes expose the depths of human cruelty, but they also revealed the gaps in our systems of justice. The missed opportunities to stop Dahmer, the inability to recognize the warning signs, and the overlooked cries for help are as much a part of his story as the murders themselves. For the families of his victims, there is no closure. The pain of losing a loved one in such a horrifying way is immeasurable. While the world may move on, the memories of their children, brothers, and fathers linger, forever marked by the tragedy that took them too soon. Yet, there is hope amidst the sorrow. Conversations about criminal justice reform, mental health, and the importance of victim advocacy are ongoing. People are now more aware of the systems that failed, and the lessons from Dahmer's case are being passed down to ensure that no more lives are lost in such senseless ways. Dahmer's story reminds us of the importance of vigilance. We must be aware of the signs of violent behavior and take responsibility to address them, before they escalate. We must listen to the marginalized and offer support to those who are often ignored. If you are moved by the story of Jeffrey Dahmer and the lives lost in his wake, we encourage you to reflect on what you can do to make a difference. Stay informed, challenge the systems that perpetuate injustice, and never forget the victims whose voices were silenced. Thank you for joining us as we explored the chilling story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Remember, the fight for justice and healing continues because every life matters. Subscribe to our channel to stay informed about more true crime stories and discussions on justice, mental health, and societal reform. Your voice matters. Together, we can help ensure that history does not repeat itself.